Hey guys, thanks for checking out my Zero Time Limit LP. This is the third game in the Zero Escape series, and the point of this particular video is just to provide a quick-ish summary of the first two games. Before I get into any of that though, I want to say that if you haven't played the Zero Escape series for yourself, I could not possibly recommend more that you do so before watching this or any other LP of any of these games. This series is extremely story heavy, and from what I can tell, without getting into anything specific, it seems like Zero Time Dilemma's story very heavily relates to the story of Virtue's Last Reward in particular. To fully enjoy this game, I'd also recommend that if you haven't done so already, play through or watch the DS version of 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors first. After that, check out Virtue's Last Reward. Then, after you've taken a few minutes to recover from all of the mind-fucking that you've just experienced, feel free to check out this LP. Okay, now I'm going to talk about spoilers. Don't worry, I'm going to be extremely clear about where spoilers are. If you only want a synopsis of one game in particular, check the bottom of the video description for a detailed breakdown of this video. By the way, I make detailed video timelines like this for all of my videos. There are no spoilers of any kind for Zero Time Dilemma in this video. At the time of my writing the script for this video, I haven't even played it yet. The bulk of this video is divided into two parts. The first focuses only on the first Zero Escape game, 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors. The second part focuses mainly on the second Zero Escape game, Virtue's Last Reward, but it does reference 999 at some points. The main things I focus on are the characters' roles in the overarching story and the individual games' endings. If I were to go over everything in both games, you'd be watching an 8-hour video right now. To prepare for this LP, I played 999 fully and took a lot of notes while playing. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to do the same for Virtue's Last Reward, but I've played through both games at least twice in the past, and I recently rewatched all of the ending cutscenes and did a decent amount of research where I needed to. I took detailed notes on all that as well. Alright, that wraps up my intro for this video. Now let's get into the first Zero Escape game, 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors. 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors, or just 999 for short, is a game in which 9 people are brought somewhere and forced to play a game called the Nonary Game. The Nonary Game is a game that deals heavily with the number 9. Nona is a Latin prefix meaning 9, by the way. The Nonary Game goes something like this. 9 persons have to escape the place they're being held captive by going through 9 numbered doors and solving puzzles within their time limit, 9 hours. Their ultimate objective is to escape the ship, which is supposedly called the Gigantic, that they were all abducted to by entering a door marked with a number 9. The Nonary Game was set up by someone who calls themselves Zero. 999 is played through the perspective of one of the Nonary Game's 9 participants, Junpei. All 9 of the participants are given numbered bracelets to wear. Basically, the bracelets ensure that any players attempting to break the rules outlined by Zero will be automatically executed. The Nonary Game was actually played once before, 9 years prior to the events of 999. The first Nonary Game was carried out by a company called Cradle Pharmaceutical. The reason for the first Nonary Game was to test something called Morphogenetic Field theory. It's a theory that essentially states that it's possible for some people to transmit thoughts through a quote-unquote field not visible to the eye, the morphogenetic field. It's kind of similar to telepathy. The participants in the first Nonary Game included 9 pairs of siblings, 18 kids in total. They were mostly about age 9 to 15 or so. The 9 pairs of siblings were split up into 2 groups of 9. That is, the siblings were split up and put into 2 separate groups. The first group of 9 kids, Group Q, was placed in a special test facility located in the Nevada desert called Building Q. The second group of 9 kids, Group A, was placed aboard a huge passenger ship called the Gigantic, which was essentially a replica of the Titanic. The interior of Building Q was an exact replica of the interior of the Gigantic. The idea of splitting the kids up was to have the kids in Group Q solve the puzzles found inside the 9 numbered doors and transmit the answers via the morphogenetic field to their brothers and sisters in Group A aboard the Gigantic. One little girl was incorrectly placed in Group A along with her brother, however. She had nobody in Group Q to tell her how to solve the puzzles. At the end of the first Nonary Game, 4 kids in Group A remained unable to escape. 3 of them were saved by a detective who'd been pursuing Cradle Pharmaceutical. Supposedly, the little girl died. Again, the first Nonary game was carried out by an organization called Cradle Pharmaceutical. The second Nonary game, which took place 9 years later, was carried out by somebody called Zero. The second Nonary game was essentially carried out for two reasons. The first reason was to exact revenge on the 4 individuals responsible for the first Nonary game. The second reason I'll get to later. For now, I'll talk a bit about the 9 participants in the second Nonary game. Each participant was forced to wear a numbered bracelet ranging from 1 to 9. They were all given code names except for the game's protagonist, Junpei. Bracelet number 8, Lotus. According to an interview with Zero Escape director Kotaro Uchikoshi, her first name is Hazuki. Last name, which was confirmed in-game, is Kashiwabara. Lotus doesn't play a very significant role in 999. She's the mother of twin girls, both of whom were participants in the first Nonary game. One of the twins' names is Nona. The other's name, according to the interview with Uchikoshi, is apparently Enya. Bracelet number 7. 7. Seven's real name is never actually mentioned anywhere in any game or in any interview by Kotaro Uchikoshi, so the only name that we have ever known him by is 7. Throughout most of 999, 7 suffers from severe amnesia. He doesn't remember anything from before he was abducted. Near the end of the game, his memory returns to him. 7's importance to the story mostly stems from his involvement with the first Nonary game. He's the detective who'd managed to save 3 of the remaining 4 kids aboard the Gigantic 9 years prior. At one point in 999, 7 talks about how he failed to save the life of a little girl back then. Bracelet number 9, the 9th man. Real name Teruaki Kubota. The 9th man was one of 4 individuals responsible for organizing the first Nonary game. He was tricked into killing himself very early on in the second Nonary game by the president of Cradle Pharmaceutical. Bracelet number 1, Ace. Real name Gentaro Hongo. Ace designed the first Nonary game and oversaw its execution aboard the Gigantic. He oversaw the kids in Group A. As such, he was considered one of the 4 individuals responsible for the first Nonary game. During the second Nonary game, he was tricked by Zero into killing the other 3. Bracelet number 4, Clover, which is actually her first, real name. Her last name was never actually mentioned in any game, but it was jokingly suggested by Uchikoshi that her last name could be Field. But it sounded like he was saying that as a joke, so that's not like her quote-unquote official last name. Clover was a participant in the first Nonary game. She was part of Group Q in the Nevada desert. This means she can access the Morphogenetic Field. She is the little sister of... Bracelet number 2, Snake. Real name Light. Like Clover, he has no official last name. Snake was also a participant in the first Nonary game. He was part of Group A aboard the Gigantic. Like Clover, he can also access the Morphogenetic Field. Bracelet number 3, Santa. Real name Aoi Kurashiki. Santa, like Snake, was one of the 9 kids aboard the Gigantic during the first Nonary game, meaning that he can also access the Morphogenetic Field. During the first Nonary game, Santa's little sister was mistakenly placed aboard the Gigantic along with him. During the second Nonary game, he acted as the assistant of Zero, the true identity of whom would be... Bracelet number 6, June. Real name Akane Kurashiki. June, Santa's little sister, masterminded the second Nonary game. Again, the second Nonary game was carried out for 2 reasons. To exact revenge on the 4 individuals responsible for the first game, and to save June herself, who supposedly died at the end of the first Nonary game. At the end of the first Nonary game, June found herself faced with a difficult puzzle. She was unable to solve it herself, but, like the other kids, she could access the Morphogenetic Field. Because she was mistakenly placed aboard the Gigantic along with her brother, the only one able to help her was her childhood friend and love, who would be faced with the exact same puzzle 9 years later. Bracelet number 5, Junpei, which is his real name, by the way. His last name wasn't mentioned in 999. 9 years after June took part in the first Nonary game, Junpei took part in the second. At the end of the second Nonary game, Junpei solved the difficult puzzle and won the Nonary game. June, 9 years in the past, watched Junpei complete the puzzle via the Morphogenetic Field and, following his movements, was able to complete her own puzzle. In order to save herself during the first Nonary game, Zero, aka June, and Santa had to carry out a second Nonary game 9 years later so that Junpei could take part in it. To be clear, as was the case with the first Nonary game, the second Nonary game was necessary for the participants to realize their ability to communicate through the Morphogenetic Field. In the case of the second Nonary game, it was necessary for Junpei to develop his ability so that he could save June 9 years in the past. At the end of the second Nonary game, all 9 of the participants, except for the 9th man who was killed by Ace, escaped through a number 9 door. Aoi and Akane, that is, Santa and June, escape before the others and flee the scene by car. The other participants escape the ship only to find that they were never actually aboard a ship at sea. They'd been inside a building Q in the Nevada desert the whole time. Junpei and the other participants get into a nearby car and follow some freshly made tire tracks, presumably left by Aoi and Akane. While driving through the desert, Junpei decides to ask Seven a question regarding Akane Kuroshiki's corpse. The corpse that Seven himself claimed to have seen at the end of the first Nonary game 9 years before. Was what you told me the truth, Seven? You look satisfied. No way. He couldn't. And that's it. That's all that was said about that. Seven actually didn't even say anything. This seems to imply that Seven knowingly lied to Junpei about seeing Akane's dead body. But the only reason he would do that would be to encourage Junpei to save her quote-unquote this time. That would imply that Seven, at least near the end of the game after regaining his memory, knew about Aoi and Akane's plot to save Akane during the first Nonary game. According to Kotaro Uchikoshi, again the Zero Escape series director, there's no official explanation for this. Here's what he had to say about it during an interview. Santa lied about her death in order to save her. Since Snake was on the ship too, we can assume that he knew the truth about Akane's death as well. If we are going to believe that Seven didn't lie, then we can assume that a fake memory was implanted in his mind somehow. If I tried to explain that in the story though, I was worried people would think I was just coming up with random excuses, so I left it up to the player's interpretation. If it makes more sense to say that both Snake and Seven were in on the plot with Santa and lied to move things along, I'm totally fine with that. And at the very end of the game, Junpei and the others come across a woman hitchhiking through the desert. Her name is Alice. So that's the first Zero Escape game, 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors, in a nutshell. I left out a lot of details, but what you've just heard are the most important pieces to the overarching story of the Zero Escape series. I think I've done a pretty good job of summarizing it all. And now, let's dive into the second, much more complicated Zero Escape game, Virtue's Last Reward. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I had a lot less time to prepare my Virtue's Last Reward summary, but here goes. Basically, my ultimate goal for this summary is to make you understand what the hell's going on with this. By the end of this video, this shit will make sense to you. But first, let me go over some more basic stuff. Alright, so Virtue's Last Reward features the third Nonary game to have taken place. Now, I'm not sure if Zero Time Dilemma has a Nonary game in it or not, so chronologically, Virtue's Last Reward's Nonary game could actually be the fourth one. But I'd rather not make assumptions either way, so I'll just call the Virtue's Last Reward Nonary game the third one. The official title of this Nonary game is Nonary Game Ambidex Edition. Ambi is a Latin prefix meaning both. The main themes behind this Nonary game are pairings and trust. Like the first two Nonary games, the goal is to escape from some place through a number 9 door, which, unlike the first two, is not hidden at all. It's sitting in plain sight right from the very beginning. The Nonary game was organized again by somebody called Zero. This person is actually referred to mostly as Zero Senior, but that's only to distinguish him or her from Zero Junior, the AI in charge of running the third Nonary game. And again, in this Nonary game, the participants are forced to wear bracelets, which, again, enforce the game's rules by executing cheaters. In order to open the number 9 door, you have to acquire 9 bracelet points, or BP for short, and pull a lever in front of the door. There are some rules though. The number 9 door will only ever open one time, so if somebody opens the door while others don't have enough BP to escape, the ones without enough BP will be forced to live the rest of their lives inside of the facility that they were all taken to. The only way you can get BP is by playing the Ambidex Game, a sub-game within the larger Nonary Game. The Ambidex Game is a psychological game designed around something called the prisoner's dilemma. Essentially, it goes like this. You and your opponent are separated and given two choices, ally or betray. Whether or not you gain or lose BP depends entirely on what you and your opponent choose. There are 4 possible outcomes. If you both choose to ally, then you both get 2 BP. If you choose to ally but your opponent chooses to betray, then you lose 2 BP and your opponent gets 3 BP. If you choose to betray but your opponent chooses to ally, then you get 3 BP and your opponent loses 2 BP. If you both choose to betray, then nobody gets or loses any BP. Not only do you need 9 BP to open the number 9 door, if your BP drops to 0, then you're executed. This makes the Nonary Game participants, most of whom are total strangers to each other, very reluctant to trust each other. Like the first 2 Nonary games, this one involves 9 participants. But before I get to them, I should go over a little bit of backstory first. In 2018, the first Nonary game was carried out by Cradle Pharmaceutical, led by Gintaro Hongo, who is Ace from 999. 9 years later, in 2027, the second Nonary game took place. It was carried out by Akane Kurashiki, June from 999, and her older brother and assistant, Aoi Kurashiki, Santa. On December 31st, 2028, an extremely contagious virus called Radical 6 escaped a test facility designed to prepare for a manned mission to Mars located in the Nevada desert. Radical 6 causes your brain's processing speed to operate at only about 40% of its normal speed. Eventually, as your brain continues to be unable to keep up with all the information that it's trying to process, it begins to fail and you develop a powerful urge to commit suicide. About 4 months after Radical 6 got out of the Mars test site, 18 annihilation reactors all exploded on Earth simultaneously. Approximately 6 billion people are killed as a result of Radical 6 and the annihilation reactor explosions. The third Nonary game takes place on Rhizome 9, a large underground facility located on the moon's surface, on January 25th, 2074, 45 years after the annihilation reactors explode. The ultimate goal of the third Nonary game, which is part of Zero Senior's larger AB project, is to stop Radical 6 from escaping the Mars mission test site 45 years in the past. Now I'll go over the participants in the third Nonary game. Clover, a participant in the first 2 Nonary games, was abducted yet again. After the events of 999, she, along with her brother Light, aka Snake, joined a US government agency called the SOIS, or Special Office of Internal Security, who were investigating a group called Free the Soul. At the very end of 999, while driving through the desert with the other participants of the second Nonary game, she met a woman who would later become her partner at SOIS. Alice, last name unknown. Alice was on her way to investigate Building Q in the Nevada desert when her car broke down, which is why she was seen hitchhiking at the end of 999. The organization she belonged to, SOIS, investigated things like domestic and foreign terrorists and potentially dangerous religious extremists. She had been investigating a religious organization called Free the Soul, led by a man called Brother. Brother's younger brother, Left, was murdered. Now, to be clear, the leader of Free the Soul is a man who goes by the name of Brother. His younger brother, whom he refers to as Left, was murdered. After agonizing over the death of Left for 9 days, Brother had a revelation, a message from God instructing him to purify the world. He founded the religious organization at the age of 26. Here are a couple of possibly important side notes about Free the Soul. Free the Soul was originally called Free the Soul of Y. Gentaro Hongo, who is Ace from 999, was a devoted member of Free the Soul. Free the Soul brought together a group of elite soldiers to make up its elite army to enact its will, a group known as the Myrmidons. It's rumored that all Myrmidons are actually clones of a single person. I'm not sure about this, but I think that they're all clones of the original Left. The clones also seem to all be called Left. Before the third Nonary game began, a member of the Myrmidons managed to infiltrate Rhizome 9. Dio, first name Left, last name unknown. Dio murdered one of the Nonary Game participants, an old woman, and then put on her bracelet. By doing this, he was able to join the third Nonary Game as its 9th player. His goal was to kill a certain person involved with the third Nonary Game and then win it. But if he failed, then he was to blow up the entire facility with antimatter bombs. Dio's actions, which often included secretly murdering one or more of the other participants, were constantly being monitored by Luna, which is her actual first name, last name unknown. Luna, a very lifelike robot with sophisticated AI, was in charge of overseeing the third Nonary Game and guiding the participants to the correct paths. She mostly intervened only when necessary, but because she was essentially ordered to just watch people die at times, which contradicted her fundamental programming that dictated that she always try to help people, she was emotionally very conflicted. Luna didn't contribute much to the main overall story, but her particular ending in Virtue's Last Reward is easily one of the saddest things I've ever seen in a video game. Next up is Quark, last name unknown. Quark actually had very little impact on the overall story. In fact, he was unconscious for about half of it. When he was younger, he was taken in by Tenmyouji, full name Junpei Tenmyouji, the same Junpei from 999. After a lifetime of chasing after Akane, Tenmyouji took in a boy named Quark. I don't remember exactly, but I think Quark was an orphan at the time. 47 years after the second Nonary Game, he was offered a chance to see Akane again. He accepted the offer and brought along Quark. They were both knocked out with knockout gas and forced to play the third Nonary Game. After eventually meeting Akane again, Tenmyouji felt that she was no longer the Akane he once knew. Speaking of Akane Kurashiki, she's murdered by Dio in most of Virtue's Last Reward's paths, but she's saved in the true path. She helped organize the AB project in the third Nonary Game along with Sigma Climb. Sigma is the game's protagonist and the true identity of Zero Senior. I'll explain Sigma's role in everything a little bit later. Phi, last name unknown. Very little is revealed about Phi in Virtue's Last Reward, but in terms of her involvement in the overall Zero Escape story, she seems to be in a very similar situation as Sigma. Like Sigma, I'll talk about Phi a little bit more later on as well. And finally, that brings us to the last participant in the third Nonary Game, K, full name Kyle Climb. Kyle is actually Sigma's clone, which is why he resembles Sigma in his earlier years. Sigma raised Kyle on his own for many years until Akane, whom K regarded as a mother figure, joined him in his work on the AB project. In my opinion, K is actually the most mysterious of the third Nonary Games participants, for reasons I'll get to a little bit later. For now, let's talk about the Morphogenetic Field. Like the first game, the Morphogenetic Field is the heart of this story, but it's utilized in a very different way. In Virtue's Last Reward and presumably Zero Time Dilemma, people who can access the Morphogenetic Field are called espers. Clover, Tenmyouji, Akane, Sigma, Phi, and K are all espers. In Virtue's Last Reward, they appear to have the ability to switch consciousnesses with themselves at another point in time, although Sigma, Phi, and K seem to be the only ones who actually use this ability. Throughout the game, Sigma and Phi send their consciousnesses backwards and forwards through time into their own bodies in different universes where they make different choices in the AB rooms and go through different chromatic doors. By doing this, they're able to accumulate valuable information, such as the passwords to deactivate Dio's 4 antimatter bombs. It's worth noting that whenever Sigma, for example, sends his consciousness back in time to inhabit his own body in an alternate universe, his two consciousnesses switch places. That is, his future consciousness that's traveling to the past takes over his body in the past, and the consciousness that was already in the past is then sent to inhabit his body in the future. Again, they just switch places. Near the beginning of my Virtue's Last Reward discussion, I mentioned that the ultimate goal of this Nonary game was to stop Radical 6 from escaping the Mars mission test site 45 years in the past. In the same way that Sigma and Phi traveled through time to inhabit their bodies in alternate universes, they're going to jump back in time 45 years to inhabit their bodies to stop Radical 6 from escaping the Mars test site. That's the sole purpose of Zero's and Akane's AB project. Speaking of Zero, I mentioned that Sigma is actually Zero, the one who masterminded the AB project. There's a reason that Sigma himself was unaware of this until the very end of the third Nonary game. Okay, now this is the part of the video where shit gets completely insane. Sigma is abducted on December 25th, 2028. Point A. Zero appears in his car and a gas grenade causes him to pass out. When that happens, Sigma's point A consciousness immediately switches places with his point B consciousness. He wakes up on the floor of the AB room on January 25th, 2074. Point B. He plays the third Nonary game along with the others. 2 days later, on January 27th, 2074, the third Nonary game ends. Point C. At the end of the Nonary game, Akane suddenly pretends to stab Phi with a knife. This causes Sigma's consciousness to jump through time again. This time, Sigma's consciousness jumps from point C all the way back to the day the reactors exploded on Earth, April 13th, 2029, point D. From point D, Sigma will have to remain in the same body for nearly half a century. During this time, Sigma has to develop the AB project and master things like cloning and genetic engineering, etc. After 45 years, Sigma will naturally come to the beginning of the third Nonary game on January 25th, 2074, point B again. After everything is set up, he loses consciousness on the floor of the AB room next to Phi. Now at this point, Sigma's young consciousness from point A will come to inhabit his old body, sending his old consciousness back to inhabit his younger body, still passed out in his car on December 25th, 2028, back to point A again. At this point, if all goes well, Sigma's done jumping through time. In 6 days on December 31st, 2028, Radical 6 will escape the Mars mission test site in the Nevada desert, point E. This is, presumably, where and when Zero Time Dilemma takes place. If Sigma and the others can stop Radical 6 from spreading, they can theoretically create a new future, illustrated by the line that goes off to the right from point E. If not, then the cycle will repeat itself. So that's my whole explanation on this chart. It's pretty complicated, and it's actually what compelled me to make this video in the first place. As crazy as all of this is, there are some even crazier things that go on at the end of Virtue's Last Reward. Things that I don't think were meant to be fully understood at the time, things that will probably be explained in Zero Time Dilemma. At the end of Virtue's Last Reward, you play as Kyle Climb, who'd just woken up from his treatment pod in the garden. Kyle walks around Rhizome 9 and talks with everyone briefly. Kyle has a short conversation with Alice and Clover. Alice and Clover were abducted on December 22nd, 2028, from Los Angeles, California. Immediately afterwards, they were frozen using a cryogenic freezing technique called CAS, which stands for Cells Alive System. They were unfrozen 45 years later to participate in the third Nonary game. At the end of the game, Clover says that Akane told her and Alice that there was a way to physically return their bodies to the past. When asked how they would get around the paradox of there being 2 Clovers and 2 Alices, their only reply is Schrodinger's cat. That's all they say. This is especially weird because, up until now, we haven't heard anything at all about any means of physically transporting physical entities to the past, only abstract things like consciousnesses, thoughts, etc. It's worth noting, however, that while this conversation was going on, everyone was gathered in front of the treatment pods in the treatment center. The box that Clover and Alice were referring to when they mentioned Schrodinger's cat was probably referencing a treatment pod. Very little is revealed about Phi during Virtue's Last Reward. At the end of the game, Kyle meets up with her in the director's office, and then she gets even more mysterious. Apparently, Phi was supposed to be with Sigma, whose body was now inhabited by his age-appropriate consciousness. She said that he was in a bedroom sleeping down the hall, and that he told her to start a hologram when Kyle showed up. Here's what Sigma's hologram had to say. I'd love to answer all of your questions, but unfortunately my circumstances make that an impossibility. Everything I know, Phi should also know. I have instructed her to answer any questions anyone might have. Anyone other than Kyle, that is. When asking Phi to explain who she really was, she went off on some weird explanation about adding velocities together. In most situations, it works, even if it isn't technically correct. So you knew enough to get the stuff you were talking about right. As long as you stick to that, you won't run into any problems. She also reveals that she can't tell Kyle what happened at the Mars test facility because, quote, it would change history. The reality beyond point E would disappear. The point of her explanation seemed to be to say that Kyle's current understanding, or maybe his lack of understanding, of the situation was necessary to what they, or maybe she, was trying to accomplish. After really paying attention to this scene, I don't really trust Phi very much anymore. Or Sigma. Why all the secrecy? And why the hell would Sigma need to tell Kyle anything in a hologram after he'd already returned to his time? I'd love to answer all your questions, but unfortunately, my circumstances make that an impossibility. Is Sigma dead when this conversation takes place? Has he jumped through time again? I feel like there's probably something sinister going on with either Phi, Sigma, or maybe Kyle. Speaking of Kyle, there seems to be something pretty crazy going on with this guy. The very final cutscene is a conversation between Kyle and Akane in the garden. Throughout the conversations Kyle had with the others, it becomes very obvious that Kyle, who was unconscious for the entire third Nonary game, knows way more than he should about it. Akane tells Kyle that, although he's inhabiting the body of Kyle Klein, his consciousness actually belongs to somebody else. When he woke up in the garden at the end of the Nonary game, point C, Kyle's consciousness was actually sent back to December 25th, 2028, point A. This means that Kyle's future consciousness should be inhabiting, quote-unquote, a body from that time, along with Sigma's future consciousness, which is inhabiting Sigma's actual younger body. According to Akane, Kyle's consciousness is integral to what they're trying to accomplish. And around this point in the conversation, Kyle's dialogue name changes from Kyle to just a question mark. When question mark asks about how Kyle could have gone back to a past where he didn't exist, he asks if that means that he and Kyle have just switched places. Akane says, I suppose you could put it that way, yes. Question mark replies, do I have to spend the rest of my life living in a borrowed body? To which Akane replies, no, not at all. You can travel freely through space and time. You are an uncontrolled variable that entered our closed system. As such, the rules of this world do not apply to you. Please don't try to play dumb. I know what you are. Surely you must know by now too. You are about to go into the past and save the world. Phi and Sigma, even with all of his future knowledge, will need your help. Only you can right the horrible wrongs of our past. Only you can save the world. Reality is shaped by what we believe reality should be. If observation can change the motion of a particle, then how is it odd to think that human thought can shape reality? Your will can change history. The world will be reshaped into the one you imagine. Remember what I've told you. And that's basically the end of the conversation. Now, about who or what question mark actually is. In the PS Vita version of the game, as soon as you finish this conversation with Akane, thereby beating the game, you get a gold trophy called A Certain Point of View. In a certain other well-known visual novel, written by Kotaro Uchikoshi, there's a character called Blickwinkle. Blickwinkle is the name given to the invisible observer influencing the world. You, the player. The person inhabiting the body of Kyle Klein at the end of Virtue's Last Reward was most likely Kotaro Uchikoshi's character Blickwinkle. Blickwinkle, by the way, is German for point of view. Well, that wraps up my discussion for the first two Zero Escape games. To be honest, when I started writing all of this, I had no idea this video would turn out to be so goddamn long. But I am glad that I took the time to make it. I feel like I understand the Zero Escape series a lot better now, and now I can go into this Zero Time Dilemma LP feeling like a fucking Zero Escape master. If you found the video helpful, then please give the video a quick like. If you hated the video and wished I would just shut the hell up, then feel free to dislike it, I guess. Once again, check my video descriptions for links to series playlists and time-coded video breakdowns. I take the time to do that for all of my videos, regardless of the game I'm playing, by the way. And because I really don't want this story spoiled for anybody watching this LP, please don't spoil anything for Zero Time Dilemma in the comments. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. I hope this video has helped you understand the absolute madness that is the Zero Escape series. Enjoy the LP. And I'm done. Holy shit, I'm done. Ugh.